On my wedding day, I walked into my reception expecting a beautiful celebration with my family. Instead, I found the main table completely replaced. 12 seats were taken by my husband's family, while my own parents were left standing near the kitchen doors. His mother looked at me and sneered that they looked too poor to sit at the VIP table. My husband agreed. So I took the microphone and made a quick announcement that ruined his entire life instantly. Before I share exactly what happened, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut toxic people out of your life. I stepped out of the bridal suite at Oakwood Manor feeling like an absolute queen. The heavy silk of my custom gown trailed perfectly behind me, brushing against the polished hardwood floors. At 35 years old, I finally felt like every piece of my life was coming together. I was highly successful in my career, deeply in love, and about to celebrate the happiest day of my existence with the people who mattered most. There was no hesitation in my step. I walked straight down the grand staircase and approached the double doors of the reception hall. My heart was pounding with that perfect kind of nervous excitement. I pushed the doors open, expecting to walk into the breathtaking vision I had spent months meticulously planning. The centerpiece of the room was supposed to be an intimate, elegantly decorated sweetheart table meant for just 6 people. It was designed specifically for me, my new husband Jamal, and both sets of our parents. It was supposed to be a beautiful blending of our two families. Instead, my breath caught in my throat and my footsteps came to a dead halt. The intimate sweetheart table was completely gone. In its place sat a massive 12-seat VIP banquet table draped in heavy velvet and overflowing with extravagant floral centerpieces. And taking up every single one of those 12 seats were members of Jamal's family. I saw Jamal sitting right in the middle laughing loudly. Beside him sat his mother Vivian, dripping in diamonds she could barely afford. On his other side sat his brother Malik and Malik's white wife Lauren, who was already tossing her head back and clinking her crystal champagne flute with one of Jamal's uncles. The entire table was filled with his extended relatives, all drinking, eating, and making themselves perfectly comfortable at the center of the room. A cold wave of panic rushed through my veins. The music was playing. The lighting was gorgeous, but all I could hear was the rushing of my own blood. I frantically scanned the massive ballroom, searching through the sea of perfectly arranged tables and elegantly dressed guests. Where were my parents? Then I saw them. My chest physically ached. My parents, Joseph and Beatrice, were standing awkwardly near the back of the room, right by the swinging doors that led into the catering kitchen. My father, a retired postal worker who had broken his back for decades to give me a good life, was wearing his neatly pressed rented suit. He stood tall, but his posture was incredibly stiff. My mother, a retired nurse who had worked double shifts so I could have nice things, was clutching her small purse, looking completely lost. Waiters carrying heavy trays of hot food kept brushing past them, pushing through the swinging doors and forcing my parents to step out of the way. I looked down and saw why they were standing there. Their beautifully calligraphed place cards, the ones I had specifically ordered for the main VIP table, had been unceremoniously dumped onto a cramped, tiny overflow table. This makeshift table was wedged terribly between a buzzing audio speaker and the dark hallway leading directly to the guest restrooms. The disrespect was not just blatant, it was violent. They had literally pushed the two people who loved me most into the darkest, loudest, and most humiliating corner of the room. My parents, the emotional core of my entire life, were being treated like unwanted staff at their own daughter's wedding. I took a deep breath, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. The scent of fresh orchids and expensive catering filled the air, mocking the horrible scene playing out in front of me. I had worked so hard to make this day perfect. I had poured my soul into ensuring that two very different worlds could merge beautifully. Jamal grew up obsessed with status, constantly chasing the approval of Atlanta high society. His mother Vivian was deeply elitist, judging everyone by their zip codes and designer labels despite her own financial realities. But my parents were different. They were grounded, real, and full of integrity. They taught me the value of a hard-earned dollar and the importance of treating people with dignity. Seeing them shoved near the restroom hallway while Lauren and Malik laughed hysterically at the main table ignited a fire inside me that I had never felt before. My hands balled into fists at my sides. The soft romantic music playing through the ballroom speakers suddenly sounded like a taunt. I realized in that exact moment that this was not a misunderstanding or a simple catering error. This was a deliberate, calculated move to erase my family from the spotlight. Vivian had decided that my working-class parents did not fit the elite aesthetic she wanted to project to their snobby friends, and Jamal had let her do it. I refused to let a single tear fall. I refused to let them see me break. I lifted my chin, adjusted the heavy skirt of my gown, and started walking straight across the polished dance floor toward the 12-seat banquet table. My heels struck the polished floor with a heavy rhythmic thud that seemed to echo in my ears above the soft jazz playing through the venue speakers. As I closed the distance, the conversation at the VIP table began to falter. Lauren lowered her glass of champagne, her exaggerated laughter dying in her throat. Malik nudged his brother. Jamal finally looked up and his confident smile wavered for a fraction of a second before he plastered it back on. I did not stop until I was standing directly across the massive floral centerpiece, locking eyes with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. Vivian sat there wrapped in a sequined gown that cost more than my parents' first car, looking entirely too pleased with herself. "Where are my parents' seats, Vivian?" My voice was dangerously calm. I did not raise it. I did not shout. I simply demanded the truth. She did not even flinch. She took a delicate sip of her drink, placed it carefully on her coaster, and looked me up and down with absolute disdain. Her gaze swept over my custom gown and then flicked toward the kitchen doors, where my mother and father were still standing in the shadows. "They look poor, Kiara." She said the words with a casual cruelty that knocked the breath out of my lungs. Their rented suits ruin the aesthetic of the VIP table. The photographer needs cohesion. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of her statement. Cohesion. Aesthetic. She was talking about the two human beings who gave me life. My father had spent 30 years sorting mail, walking miles in the freezing rain and blistering heat to make sure I never went to bed hungry. My mother had worked double shifts at the hospital, wiping brows and holding the hands of dying patients just to afford my college tuition. They were the most dignified people in this entire building. But to a woman like Vivian, who judged human worth by designer labels and country club memberships, they were nothing but an embarrassing blemish on her perfect society event. A hot, sharp anger flared in my chest, but I held it back. I did not need to fight Vivian. I had a husband for that. I turned my gaze to Jamal. This was the man who had held my hands and promised to protect me. The man who knew exactly what my parents had sacrificed so I could stand in this room today. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to slam his fist on the table, demand respect for my family, and pull out chairs for Joseph and Beatrice himself. I stared into his eyes, fully expecting him to shut his mother down with the fierce loyalty he had always promised me. Instead, Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He looked at me, then looked down at the table. He reached out and wrapped his fingers around the stem of his champagne flute. He lifted the crystal glass and took a slow, agonizingly long sip. He actively avoided looking into my eyes. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "She is right, babe," Jamal muttered, his voice barely loud enough to carry over the background music. "Just let them sit at the overflow table. Do not make a scene and ruin our big day." The world seemed to stop spinning. The room faded away, leaving only the cowardly, pathetic man sitting in front of me. I heard the words echo in my mind again and again. "Do not make a scene. Ruin our big day." He was actually agreeing with her. He was choosing the visual aesthetic of a banquet table over the dignity of the people who raised me. He was perfectly fine with hiding my hard-working parents by the restrooms just to appease his elitist mother and impress his snobby business investors. In that single terrifyingly clear moment, the illusion shattered completely. The charming, ambitious man I thought I was marrying vanished into thin air. In his place sat a weak, social climbing fraud who cared more about projecting a wealthy image than defending his own wife. I looked at Lauren, who was now hiding a smirk behind her napkin, and then at Malik, who simply shook his head as if I were being unreasonable. They were all in on it. Every single person at that table was complicit in this blatant disrespect. I was standing alone, surrounded by a family of arrogant parasites. But they had made one massive fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was just a lucky corporate manager desperate to marry into their supposedly elite family. They assumed I would swallow the insult, bow my head, and accept my place at the bottom of their social hierarchy. I planted my hands firmly on the edge of the velvet tablecloth and leaned in close, ensuring Jamal could hear every single word. "Fix this right now," I demanded. "Get up, move those chairs, and bring my parents to this table, or there will not be a wedding for you to celebrate." Jamal did not flinch with guilt. He flinched with irritation. It was the kind of sharp, annoyed twitch a man gives when he is interrupted during an important business call. He stood up quickly, knocking his heavy wooden chair back a few inches against the polished floor. Before I could take another breath, his hand shot out and clamped down hard around my bicep. The grip was tight, far too tight. His fingers dug into the delicate lace of my custom sleeve, pulling me roughly a few steps away from the velvet-draped table. He positioned his tall frame between me and the rest of the room, effectively blocking the view of the guests. I stared down at his hand, gripping my arm, and then up at his face. The charming camera-ready smile he used for magazine features and networking events was completely gone. His jaw was clenched so hard, a muscle twitched violently near his ear. "Are you out of your mind?" he hissed. His voice dropped to a vicious, venomous whisper, designed so that only I could hear the pure rage radiating from him. "You are not going to stand here and pitch a fit over seating arrangements. Look around you, Kiara." He jerked his head slightly toward the center of the glittering ballroom. "Do you see Table 4? That is Harrison Vance and his entire venture capital board. They flew in from Silicon Valley just for this wedding. I have been courting their firm for 8 months to save my startup. I am not letting you act out some angry black woman stereotype in front of the exact people who hold my financial future in their hands. Lower your voice and stop embarrassing me." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. Angry black woman stereotype. My own fiancé, a black man who knew my heart, my character, and my relentless work ethic, was weaponizing the oldest, most racist trope in the book just to silence me. He was perfectly fine with his mother treating my parents like discarded trash, but my righteous indignation over it was somehow an embarrassment. He cared more about the optics for a table of wealthy white tech investors than he cared about the basic human dignity of the family he was marrying into. I felt a cold, heavy knot form in the pit of my stomach. The man holding my arm was a stranger. I tried to yank my arm away, but his fingers only tightened, refusing to let me go until I submitted to his authority. "Let her go, Jamal." A high-pitched, sugary voice floated over his shoulder. I looked past him to see Lauren rising from her seat next to Malik. She smoothed down the front of her expensive pastel silk dress and glided over to us with the practiced elegance of a woman who had never been told no in her entire life. Lauren was Malik's wife, a white woman who loved to adopt the aesthetics of our culture when it suited her, but who instinctively weaponized her own fragility the very second she felt challenged. She inserted herself smoothly between Jamal and me. Jamal finally released my arm, letting his hand drop to his side, but the physical and emotional damage was already done. Lauren reached out and placed a soft, perfectly manicured hand on my forearm, resting her fingers exactly where Jamal had just been grabbing me. Her touch felt like ice. "Kiara. Sweetie, let us take a deep breath and be reasonable here," she cooed. Her tone was patronizingly gentle, like she was trying to calm down a toddler having a public tantrum in a grocery store. "It is your wedding day. You are just stressed out and letting your emotions run high." I stared at her hand on my arm, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her interference. "Do not tell me to be reasonable, Lauren," I said, my voice low and dangerously steady. "My parents are sitting by the restrooms." Lauren gave a small, sympathetic pout that did not reach her cold, calculating eyes. "I know it is not traditional," she murmured, giving my arm a little squeeze. But Jamal has a very specific vision for his brand today. This reception is a crucial networking event for his company. You have to understand the immense pressure he is under to present a certain image to the venture capitalists. Your parents are perfectly comfortable back there at the overflow table. They have a lovely view of the dance floor, and the catering staff is taking great care of them. Let us not be aggressive over seating charts and ruin the beautiful aesthetic we all worked so hard to put together. Aggressive. There it was again. First, Jamal called me an angry black woman, and now his white sister-in-law was calling me aggressive for simply demanding that my mother and father be treated with basic human respect. The coded language was blindingly obvious. Lauren was using her soft, polite tone to paint me as erratic and dangerous, while entirely validating Vivian's blatant classism. She was shielding the cruelty of this family behind a mask of fake concern and wedding day etiquette. She wanted me to feel crazy for reacting naturally to an incredibly toxic situation. I glanced over Lauren's shoulder. Vivian was watching the entire exchange with a smug, satisfied smirk resting comfortably on her face. She took another leisurely sip of her champagne, clearly enjoying the show. She did not even have to fight her own battles anymore. She had her son physically restraining me, and her daughter-in-law tone policing me on her behalf. Malik just sat there cutting his steak, completely ignoring the fact that his wife was currently disrespecting his brother's bride. They operated as a unified front, a well-oiled machine of manipulation and elitism. They truly believed they held all the power in this room. They looked at me and saw nothing but a lucky mid-level manager who should be falling to her knees in gratitude that they even let my working-class parents through the front doors of a place like Oakwood Manor. They thought I was desperate to belong to their world. They thought they could break my spirit and mold me into a quiet, obedient wife who would fund their lifestyle while swallowing their daily insults. I yanked my arm out of Jamal's grip with a sudden sharp twist that made him stumble forward. He looked shocked, as if a piece of furniture had just talked back to him. I smoothed the delicate lace on my custom sleeve, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every single syllable was carved out of ice. "Aggressive Lauren?" I asked, tilting my head slightly as I looked into her wide, pale face. "Are we really going to play the vocabulary game today? Let us talk about what aggressive actually looks like in this family. Is it aggressive to demand a chair for my father? Or is it aggressive the way Vivian snatched the French wine list out of my father's hands at the rehearsal dinner last night, loudly assuming a retired postal worker could not possibly understand Bordeaux vintages?" Vivian gasped, pressing a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. "How dare you bring that up?" she hissed, glancing nervously toward the investor tables across the room. "It was a simple misunderstanding." "Your father is a simple man, Kiara. I was trying to save him from embarrassment." I laughed, a short, dry sound that held absolutely no humor. "You save no one, Vivian. You only take." I turned my attention back to Jamal, who was now sweating profusely under the warm venue lights. His tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume he had borrowed for a school play. "And you, Jamal, you have the nerve to stand here and tone police me about embarrassing you in front of Silicon Valley venture capitalists. You want to talk about embarrassment? How about the way you aggressively begged me on your hands and knees in our kitchen 2 years ago to cover the payments on your imported sports car?" Jamal's eyes widened in sheer terror. "Kiara, shut up," he pleaded, stepping forward again, but this time holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Please do not do this right now. We can talk about the finances later." But I was not stopping. The floodgates were open and years of suppressed frustration poured out. "You needed that car to project success for your startup, right? You told me you could not pull up to investor meetings looking like a regular guy from the neighborhood. So the lucky corporate manager you think you are settling for paid your luxury lease every single month for 24 months so you could parade around Atlanta pretending to be part of the black elite. My working-class paycheck funded your entire aesthetic. You are standing here trying to impress billionaires while driving a car you do not even own." Lauren stepped back, her fake sympathetic smile completely gone. Her cheeks flushed an angry mottled red. "This is wildly inappropriate for a wedding reception," she whispered fiercely, looking around to ensure none of the high-profile guests were listening to our dispute. "You are showing your true colors, Kiara. You have no class. You are taking a beautiful family moment and turning it into a ghetto shouting match." I turned my absolute focus onto her and Malik. Malik had finally stopped cutting his steak. He sat frozen, staring at me with his fork suspended in midair. "Do not lecture me about class, Lauren," I said, leaning closer to her across the floral arrangements. "Because true class is paying your own bills. Did you tell Vivian how you and Malik afforded that beautiful colonial house in Buckhead?" Vivian frowned, her heavy diamond necklace shifting as she looked from me to her eldest son. "What is she talking about, Malik?" Malik swallowed hard, refusing to make eye contact with his mother. "I will tell her," I offered. 3 months ago, Malik and Lauren were 90 days behind on their mortgage. The bank was sending foreclosure notices to their pristine front door. Lauren was having daily panic attacks because she could not bear the thought of her country club friends finding out they were broke and living beyond their means. So Malik came to my modest little office begging for a bailout. "I wrote a personal check for $40,000 to save your house, Lauren. You mocked my mother's off-the-rack dress this morning while wearing designer shoes bought with the money my parents taught me how to earn and save." The silence at the VIP table was absolute. The clinking of glasses had stopped completely. The extended relatives sitting at the ends of the banquet table were staring at their plates, too stunned to speak. I had systematically stripped away the glamorous facade they all hid behind. They looked down on my parents for their honest labor, while secretly surviving on the fruits of that exact same labor. They were parasites draped in silk and velvet, judging the very people who kept a roof over their heads. Vivian's face had drained of all color. She prided herself on being the matriarch of an affluent, highly educated dynasty. To hear that both of her sons were secretly being financially propped up by a woman she considered beneath her was tearing her reality to shreds. She looked at Jamal, seeking a denial. "Jamal, tell me she is lying," Vivian demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Tell me you did not take money from this woman." Jamal wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "We are partners, Mom," he stammered, trying to salvage his pride in front of his family. "That is what partners do. We invest in each other. It was just a temporary cash flow issue. Partners respect each other, Jamal." I countered, stepping right up to his chest. "Partners do not hide their future in laws next to a bathroom hallway to score points with strangers. You took my money to build a fake empire, and now you want to erase the people who made me who I am. You think my parents ruin the aesthetic of this room. You think their presence diminishes your value to those investors sitting over there. You are a coward. You surround yourself with yes men and social climbers because you are terrified someone will realize you have absolutely nothing of your own." Lauren crossed her arms defensively, trying to reclaim some shred of her shattered dignity. "You are holding a financial favor over our heads to justify ruining a wedding. That is incredibly toxic, Kiara. We accepted your help because we thought you wanted to be part of this family. We did not know it came with conditions." "The condition was basic human respect," Lauren, I shot back. "But clearly, that is something none of you can afford to give. You sit here drinking champagne at a table you did not pay for, judging the people who raised me. You think because my parents do not care about designer labels or country club memberships that they are invisible. You think you can walk all over them and I will just smile and play the grateful bride." The table remained deadly quiet. The sheer force of the truth had pinned them all to their seats. For the first time since I met them, Vivian, Lauren, Malik, and Jamal had nothing to say. Their superiority complex had been completely dismantled. They were exposed as financial frauds, hiding behind a thin veneer of social elitism. I looked at Jamal's face, expecting to see remorse, or at least an apology forming on his lips. Instead, I only saw resentment. He was not sorry for what he had done to my parents. He was only angry that his facade had been ripped away in front of his mother and brother. I stood there waiting for a single ounce of remorse to cross Jamal's face. I waited for the man I loved to step up and apologize too. apologize for the seating arrangement, to apologize for his mother, to apologize for putting his fragile ego above our relationship. But as the seconds ticked by, the resentment in his dark eyes only deepened. He was furious that I had dared to pull back the curtain. He was angry that I refused to play my assigned role of the quiet, supportive financial backing to his grand illusion. He did not care about the pain he was causing, he only cared about the exposure. Before either of us could speak again, I felt a gentle, familiar weight settle onto my right shoulder. The warmth of a large, calloused hand grounded me instantly. I did not have to turn around to know it was my father. Joseph stood right behind me. He had walked over from the shadows near the kitchen doors, crossing the gleaming dance floor while the rest of the room held its collective breath. He stepped into the tense, hostile circle surrounding the VIP table, bringing with him a quiet, immense dignity that instantly dwarfed the fake glamour of Vivian and her sons. My father was wearing a dark charcoal suit he had rented specifically for today. It did not have the custom European cut of Jamal's tuxedo, and his shoes were not imported leather. But his suit was impeccably pressed, his posture was perfectly straight, and he carried himself with the quiet pride of a man who had worked an honest, demanding job every single day of his adult life. He was a retired postal worker. He had walked through freezing rain, blistering Atlanta heat, and neighborhood dogs just to make sure our lights stayed on and my college tuition was paid. His hands told the story of his sacrifices. I looked at his hand resting on my shoulder. The rough skin, the permanent aches in his knuckles. Those hands had built my foundation. I turned my head slightly to look at his face. His dark eyes were soft, filled with a mixture of immense love and deep resignation. He offered me a tight, forced smile, trying his absolute best to project calm. Beatrice, my mother, was standing just a few feet behind him, holding her small clutch purse tightly to her chest. She gave me a brave nod, though I could see the unshed tears shining in her eyes. They had watched the entire confrontation unfold. They had heard Vivian call them poor. They had watched my fiancé refuse to defend them, and still my father was trying to protect me. "It is okay, baby girl," my father said. His voice was a low, soothing rumble, completely devoid of the anger I knew he had every right to feel. "Please do not do this. Do not fight on your wedding day. We do not mind the back table. We really do not." I stared at him, my heart physically aching in my chest. "Your mother and I are just so happy to see you in that beautiful dress," he continued, giving my shoulder a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "We are just happy to see you getting married. You go on and sit down with your new family. Let us just celebrate. Just get married and be happy. Do not worry about us." He was trying to save my wedding. He was willing to walk back to that cramped table near the restrooms to sit next to a buzzing speaker and watch waiters push past his chair all night long just so his daughter could have a peaceful reception. He was willing to swallow a massive, humiliating insult from Vivian and Jamal just to ensure my day was not ruined. My parents were so accustomed to making themselves small so I could be big that they were prepared to absorb this blatant disrespect without a single complaint. I looked from my father's kind, weathered face back to the people sitting at the banquet table. Vivian was watching my father with a look of supreme satisfaction. In her twisted mind, his willingness to back down and accept the overflow table was confirmation that he knew his place. Lauren had her arms crossed, looking entirely relieved that the uncultured people were finally retreating. Malik was already picking up his fork again to resume eating. And Jamal, my supposed partner, my future husband, let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. He actually smiled a tight, patronizing smile, aimed right at my father. "Thank you, sir," Jamal said, his voice dripping with fake respect. "I appreciate your understanding. It is just a logistical thing. We will make sure the waiters take extra good care of you back there." That was the exact moment it happened. Something fundamental and permanent snapped inside my chest. It was not a loud, explosive break. It was a quiet, absolute severing of every single tie that bound me to Jamal and his family. The hot, burning anger I had been feeling just moments ago suddenly vanished completely, replaced by a freezing, terrifying clarity. I looked at Jamal smiling as he dismissed my father to the back of the room. I looked at Vivian draped in jewels bought with money her sons had siphoned from my bank accounts. I looked at Lauren and Malik sitting comfortably in a social position, funded entirely by my willingness to save them from foreclosure. They were parasites. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I was not marrying into a family with a few character flaws or slightly different social values. I was actively legally binding myself to a family of leeches. They fed on the capital, the labor, and the strength of others, while projecting an entirely fabricated aura of superiority. They contributed nothing to the world, but demanded the best seats in the house. They produced nothing but felt entirely entitled to judge the people who actually built things. My father had spent 30 years performing hard manual labor to give me a chance at a better life. Jamal had spent the last 2 years burning through my venture capital funds to buy tailored suits and imported cars just to impress venture capitalists who did not even care about him. Jamal did not love me. He loved the lifestyle my silent labor afforded him. He loved the safety net I provided for his failing startup and his financially irresponsible family. I was nothing more than a wealthy host organism for them to drain dry while they pushed my actual family into the shadows. A profound shift occurred in my mind. The accommodating, quiet fiancée, the woman who nodded along to avoid conflict, the woman who secretly paid off Jamal's car note to save his ego, that woman died right there on the polished dance floor of Oakwood Manor. She ceased to exist entirely. I realized that if I walked back to that table and sat down next to Jamal, I would be validating everything they had just done. I would be telling my father that his dignity was worth less than the visual aesthetic of a wedding reception. I would be telling my mother that her lifetime of sacrifices meant nothing compared to Vivian's designer gown. If I stayed silent, I would be just as complicit as Lauren and Malik. I would be participating in the humiliation of my own blood. I placed my hand over my father's rough fingers where they still rested on my shoulder. I squeezed his hand tightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. "No, Daddy," I said, my voice soft, but echoing with absolute finality. "It is not okay. You are not sitting at the back table, and I am not marrying this man." My father's eyes widened in surprise, but he did not pull his hand away. He stood firmly beside me, a silent pillar of support, as the weight of my words settled over the VIP table. Jamal's relieved smile instantly dissolved. His posture went rigid and he dropped his champagne flute back onto the table with a sharp clink. "Kiara, stop playing around," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave, as panic finally began to edge into his tone. "You are taking this way too far." I let go of my father's hand and took a slow, deliberate step back from the velvet-draped table. I looked at Jamal, feeling absolutely nothing for him. No love, no heartbreak, no regret. Just a cold, clinical desire to dismantle the fraudulent empire he had built on my back. I am not playing Jamal. I am simply ending the charade. I turned my back on him. I did not wait for his response. I did not look at Vivian's shocked face or Lauren's sudden gasp. I smoothed the skirt of my wedding gown, locked my eyes on the far side of the ballroom, and began walking away from the VIP table. My destination was clear. I was heading straight toward the raised platform in the corner of the room where my hired DJ was currently mixing a soft, instrumental track. The time for private arguments and hushed compromises was over. It was time to introduce Jamal, his family, and his wealthy investors to the real Kiara. I kept my eyes locked on the raised platform in the far corner of the ballroom. The distance between the VIP banquet table and the DJ booth felt like a mile, but I walked it with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. My heavy silk gown glided over the polished hardwood floor. The soft jazz instrumental playing through the venue speakers seemed to mock the absolute chaos brewing just beneath the surface of this reception. Guests at the surrounding tables were still eating, oblivious to the fracture that had just torn my world apart. I saw Harrison Vance, the Silicon Valley venture capitalist Jamal had been obsessing over, laughing loudly at table 4. I saw my college friends at table 7 holding up their glasses in a toast. They all thought they were attending the wedding of a lucky mid-level corporate manager to a rising tech star. They had no idea they were about to witness an execution. As I approached the platform, the DJ looked up from his mixing board. His name was David. He was not a venue-provided vendor. He was an independent contractor I had personally hired and paid out of my own pocket. We had worked together on several high-profile corporate galas I managed in the past. He knew my professional side. He knew the Kiara who ran multi-million-dollar events with flawless precision. When David saw my face, his professional smile instantly vanished. He did not see a blushing bride. He saw the woman who signed his paychecks, and she was operating on a completely different frequency. I stepped onto the platform and walked directly up to his equipment table. I did not shed a single tear. My vision was crystal clear, my breathing perfectly regulated. David leaned in expecting me to request a specific song for a bridal entrance or a first dance. Instead, I held out my right hand palm open. "Cut the music, David," I said. My voice was low, but it carried the absolute authority of a direct command. "Give me the microphone." David hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hands hovering over his soundboard. He glanced past me toward the VIP table, where Jamal was now standing up, a look of absolute panic spreading across his face. David looked back at me, saw the unrelenting ice in my eyes, and made the smart choice. He was loyal to the person who funded his invoice. He slid the volume slider all the way down to 0. The soft jazz music cut out instantly. The sudden absence of sound was jarring. It hit the massive ballroom like a physical shockwave. 200 guests stopped talking mid-sentence. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and silver forks against fine china ceased entirely. Waiters froze in their tracks holding trays of expensive appetizers. The heavy silence hung in the air, suffocating and absolute. 200 heads turned simultaneously toward the DJ booth, trying to understand why the celebratory atmosphere had been abruptly terminated. David unclipped the wireless microphone from its stand and placed it firmly into my outstretched hand. The metal handle felt cool and heavy against my palm. It felt like a weapon. I gripped it tightly, turning around to face the crowded room. From my elevated position on the platform, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom. I saw my parents, Joseph and Beatrice, still standing near the kitchen swing doors, holding each other tightly. I saw Harrison Vance and his wealthy investors lowering their drinks, looking confused and slightly annoyed by the interruption. And right in the center of the room, I saw the 12-seat VIP banquet table. Jamal was frozen halfway out of his chair. Vivian was gripping the edge of the velvet tablecloth, her knuckles turning white. Lauren had a hand pressed to her chest, her mouth hanging slightly open in genuine fear. Malik was staring at me wide-eyed, realizing too late that they had pushed the wrong woman entirely too far. They were waiting for me to break down. They were waiting for me to throw a hysterical fit that would validate their narrative of the angry, aggressive black woman. They wanted me to scream and cry so they could dismiss me as emotionally unstable and maintain their unearned dignity. I was not going to give them that satisfaction. I was going to dismantle their entire existence with cold, calculated precision. I raised the microphone to my lips. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, filling every corner of the massive Oakwood Manor reception hall. It was deadly calm, perfectly projected, and entirely devoid of the emotional breakdown my husband's family was desperately hoping for. I spoke with the polished cadence of a corporate executive addressing a boardroom. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate what was supposed to be a beautiful union of two families. I appreciate the time and the expense you have all taken to witness this event. I see many familiar faces in the crowd. I see lifelong friends. I see beloved family members. I also see many distinguished guests from the technology and venture capital sectors who traveled across the country to be here tonight to support Jamal and his vision." I paused, letting my words sink in. I made direct eye contact with Harrison Vance at table 4. The powerful investor sat up straighter, giving me his full, undivided attention. He sensed the shift in the room. Men who dealt in millions of dollars could always smell when a deal was going bad, and this deal was crashing straight into the ground. I shifted my gaze back to the center of the room, locking eyes with my fiancé. Jamal was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew I held the power to destroy his carefully curated public image, but he still believed I was just a mid-level manager throwing a tantrum over a seating chart. He still believed he could salvage this. He took a step away from the VIP table, holding his hands up with his palms facing me, offering a fake, placating smile to the crowd. He was trying to project the image of a patient, loving husband dealing with a stressed-out bride. But I was holding the microphone and I controlled the narrative. Weddings are built on the promise of transparency, of partnership, and of mutual respect. I continued pacing slowly across the raised platform. We stand up in front of our communities and vow to honor not just each other, but the foundations that made us who we are. But today I was presented with a very different reality. I was presented with a reality where appearances are valued far more than actual human dignity. The guests were completely silent. No one dared to move. I raised my free hand and pointed directly at the massive floral arrangement sitting in front of Vivian. Just moments ago, I walked into this reception hall to find that the intimate sweetheart table I planned for my parents and my new in-laws had been entirely replaced by that massive VIP banquet table. And I was informed by my new mother-in-law, Vivian, that my parents, my hardworking, decent, loving parents, were not welcome to sit there. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Several guests at the tables closest to the DJ booth shifted uncomfortably, turning their heads to look at the VIP table. Vivian recoiled as if she had been physically struck, her face draining of all color. I kept my voice absolutely even, refusing to let my anger waver my pitch. I was told that my parents, who spent their lives working honest jobs to provide for me, looked too poor to sit at the main table. I was told that their rented suits would ruin the visual aesthetic of this elite gathering. I was told that they needed to be hidden away at a cramped table by the restrooms so that Jamal and his family could project a wealthy, cohesive image for the high-profile investors in this room. The murmurs erupted instantly. I watched Harrison Vance turn to his associates, his brow furrowed in deep disapproval. The illusion of Jamal's flawless elite background was cracking wide open for his investors to see. Jamal panicked. He rushed forward, closing the distance between the table and the DJ booth. He was desperate to stop the bleeding, but he was far too late and I was just getting started. Jamal bounded up the short steps to the platform, his face slick with sweat. His hands reached frantically for the microphone as he hissed my name under his breath, ordering me to stop. But before his fingers could even graze the metal handle, David stepped smoothly between us. My DJ simply placed a firm hand squarely on Jamal's chest and shoved him back a few paces. David did not say a single word, but his stance was a physical barrier that Jamal was too cowardly to breach. I looked at the man I had almost married. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically toward Harrison Vance and the investor tables. He was watching his entire fabricated world catch fire and burn. I brought the microphone back to my lips, ensuring the audio was perfectly clear. For the past 2 years, Jamal and his family have been under the impression that I am merely a mid-level corporate manager. They believed I was just a lucky working-class girl who managed to secure a decent salary and scrape together enough savings to cover the down payment on this wedding. And frankly, they believed I was just foolish enough to cover the luxury car leases and mortgage deficits keeping Jamal and his brother afloat. Malik and Lauren shrank into their seats. Vivian opened her mouth to object, but no sound came out. What Vivian and Jamal do not know, because they were always too busy talking about themselves to ever actually ask about my work, is that my modest corporate job is a cover. It is a shell position for my privacy. I am the silent majority stakeholder of the luxury real estate and hospitality conglomerate that owns and operates Oakwood Manor. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Even the breathing of the guests seemed to pause. I let my eyes sweep across the VIP table, locking directly onto Vivian. "You are currently sitting inside my house." Vivian let out a sharp, ugly scoff. The sound cut through the quiet room like shattering glass. She stood up from her velvet-draped chair, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at the stage. "She is lying!" Vivian shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its fake polite veneer. "She is a delusional liar. My son is the successful one. She is just a bitter woman trying to ruin a beautiful wedding with wild fantasies. Do not listen to her." I did not argue with her. I simply raised my free hand and snapped my fingers. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Marcus, the general manager of Oakwood Manor, strode into the room, He was impeccably dressed and flanked by 4 members of my private elite security detail. The men moved with swift military precision, cutting right through the sea of guest tables. Marcus walked directly up to the stage, bypassing Jamal completely, and handed me a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I opened the portfolio, holding up the heavy notarized documents for the front rows to see. These are the property deeds to the Oakwood Manor estate. The holding company listed as the sole proprietor is legally registered to me. I own this venue. I own the catering company currently serving your dinner. I own the very ground you are standing on. Jamal looked like he was going to vomit. His knees literally buckled, causing him to stumble back against the edge of the DJ booth. He looked at the deeds and then up at me, his mind finally grasping the magnitude of his mistake. "But we have a prenup," he stammered, his voice cracking over the ambient room noise. "You signed the prenup to protect my startup assets. My mother had the lawyers draft it." I smiled at him for the very first time that night. "Yes, Jamal. I signed that ironclad prenuptial agreement your mother was so desperate to force upon me. But clearly neither of you actually read the final draft my legal team returned to your lawyers. I suggest you review Clause 4B. That specific clause categorically protects all pre-existing corporate holdings and anonymous LLCs from any marital claims. You thought you were boxing me out of your tech startup. In reality, you legally cemented my total protection over the empire I already built. You brought me a shield and I gladly signed on the dotted line." The blood completely left Jamal's face. He stood there on the raised platform looking exactly like a man who had just watched his own execution order being signed. The arrogance that usually rolled off him in waves evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, desperate shell. The custom tuxedo he was so incredibly proud of suddenly looked like a cheap costume. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. His mind was racing frantically, trying to process the magnitude of the catastrophic error he had just made. He had spent months scheming with his mother to draft a prenuptial agreement that would protect his imaginary tech wealth from my working-class hands. Instead, he had unknowingly handed me the exact legal framework I needed to lock him out of an empire worth tens of millions of dollars. For a long, agonizing moment, he could not form a single word. He looked down at the heavy leather portfolio in my hand, the property deeds bearing the seal of the holding company. Then his eyes darted past me, searching the crowd. He was not looking at my parents. He was not looking at his mother, Vivian, who was still frozen in her chair at the VIP table. He was looking straight at table 4. He was looking at Harrison Sterling and the rest of the venture capital board he had flown in from Silicon Valley. I watched the exact second Jamal realized his entire professional and social future was hanging by a thread. The investors were not smiling. They were watching the stage with expressions of severe discomfort and deep disapproval. Men who controlled millions of dollars in investment capital did not appreciate public humiliation, and they certainly did not invest in founders who could not even manage their own wedding receptions. Jamal shifted into pure survival mode. The desperate social climber inside him took over. He straightened his posture, pulled his shoulders back, and forced his facial muscles to arrange themselves into his signature charismatic smile. It was a terrifying transformation to witness. In the blink of an eye, he tried to erase the vicious, selfish man who had just told me to shove my parents into a corner. He was trying to become the brilliant, charming tech founder again. He let out a loud, booming laugh. The sound was incredibly fake and hollow, echoing awkwardly against the dead silence of the ballroom. Nobody in the crowd laughed with him. The guests simply stared, watching the performance unfold with morbid fascination. Jamal stepped closer to me, raising his hands in a theatrical gesture of surrender. He projected his voice so the first few rows of tables could hear him without the microphone. Okay, you got me," he said, forcing another chuckle. He turned slightly toward the audience, flashing that bright, manufactured smile. "Let us give a round of applause for my beautiful, brilliant bride, everyone. She always knows how to command a room. We have been pulling pranks on each other all week to cut the tension, and she definitely just won the grand prize." He turned back to me, reaching out with his right hand. His fingers stretched toward the microphone I was holding tight against my chest. His eyes were wide and frantic, silently begging me to play along. "Baby, you are incredibly stressed," he said, lowering his voice slightly, but maintaining the fake cheerful tone. "Wedding planning is exhausting, and you have been running on empty for days. You are letting the nerves get the best of you right now. Let us just put the mic down. We can go to the back room, grab a glass of water, and talk about this in private. The catering staff is ready to serve the main course, and we are keeping our guests waiting. Let us go to the back, baby. Come on, give me the mic." He took another step forward, invading my personal space. He reached for the microphone again, expecting me to simply hand it over. He expected the old Kiara to surface. He genuinely believed that if he applied enough public pressure, if he painted me as a stressed-out, hysterical bride, I would fold. He thought my desire to avoid public embarrassment would override my need for basic respect. He thought I would prioritize his fragile ego over my own dignity. He was wrong. I did not hand him the microphone. I did not step back. I stood my ground, planting my heels firmly onto the platform floor. When his fingers grazed the metal handle of the mic, I swiftly pulled it out of his reach, holding it firmly in my left hand. I looked him dead in the eyes and let the silence stretch between us. I watched the fake smile slowly slide right off his face. The charismatic tech founder mask cracked, revealing the terrified little boy hiding underneath. He could see the absolute zero in my eyes. There was no love left for him to manipulate. There was no sympathy left for him to exploit. I raised the microphone back to my lips, keeping my gaze locked entirely on his sweating, terrified face. "I am not stressed, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing out crystal clear across the silent room. "I am not suffering from wedding jitters, and I am certainly not playing a prank on our guests. Do not insult my intelligence, and do not insult the intelligence of every single person sitting in this room by pretending this is some sort of joke. We are not going to a back room. We are not going to have a quiet, private chat so you can manipulate me behind closed doors. The time for private conversations ended the exact second you allowed your mother to treat my parents like unwanted garbage in my own building." Jamal flinched as if I had physically struck him. He looked over his shoulder at the VIP table, silently pleading for someone to intervene. But nobody moved. Vivian was staring down at her empty plate, her face a mask of bitter humiliation. Lauren was frantically whispering something to Malik, but neither of them dared to make eye contact with the stage. They were entirely useless to him now. They had relied on his ability to control me, and he was failing spectacularly. He turned back to me, his voice dropping to a desperate raw whisper that the microphone barely caught. "Kiara, please," he begged, his eyes filling with actual tears. "You are destroying my life. Harrison is sitting right there. The entire board is watching us. If you do this, my company is dead. I will lose everything. Please just walk away with me." I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was not apologizing for disrespecting my father. He was not apologizing for allowing his mother to humiliate my mother. He was not asking for my forgiveness. He was only begging me to save his public image. He cared more about the opinions of a few wealthy investors than he cared about the woman standing in front of him. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to retreat. I held the microphone steady, making sure every word I spoke next would be heard clearly by the investors he was so desperate to impress. "You are asking me to protect your public image, Jamal," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You want me to step down from this stage and hide in the shadows so you can maintain the illusion of being a successful, brilliant entrepreneur. You want these investors to believe you are a man of substance and wealth. You want them to write you massive checks based on a completely fabricated reality." I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify my next words. "But why should I protect the image of a man who is entirely hollow? Why should I protect a man who builds his entire existence on a foundation of lies?" Jamal shook his head frantically, raising his hands in a desperate plea for silence. But I did not stop. The truth was a scalpel, and I was ready to make the deepest cut. The blood completely left Jamal's face. He stood there on the raised platform, looking exactly like a man who had just watched his own execution order being signed. The arrogance that usually rolled off him in waves evaporated entirely, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, desperate shell. The custom tuxedo he was so incredibly proud of suddenly looked like a cheap, borrowed costume. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. His mind was racing frantically, trying to process the magnitude of the catastrophic error he had just made. He had spent months scheming with his mother to draft a prenuptial agreement that would protect his imaginary tech wealth from my working-class hands. Instead, he had unknowingly handed me the exact legal framework I needed to lock him out of an empire worth tens of millions of dollars. For a long, agonizing moment, he could not form a single word. He looked down at the heavy leather portfolio in my hand, the property deeds bearing the seal of my holding company. Then his eyes darted past me, searching the crowd. He was not looking at my parents. He was not looking at his mother, Vivian, who was still frozen in her chair at the VIP table. He was looking straight at table 4. He was looking at Harrison Sterling and the rest of the venture capital board he had flown in from Silicon Valley. I watched the exact second Jamal realized his entire professional and social future was hanging by a thread. The investors were not smiling. They were watching the stage with expressions of severe discomfort and deep disapproval. Men who controlled millions of dollars in investment capital did not appreciate public humiliation, and they certainly did not invest in founders who could not even manage their own wedding receptions. Jamal shifted into pure survival mode. The desperate social climber inside him took over. He straightened his posture, pulled his shoulders back, and forced his facial muscles to arrange themselves into his signature charismatic smile. It was a terrifying transformation to witness. In the blink of an eye, he tried to erase the vicious, selfish man who had just told me to shove my parents into a corner. He was trying to become the brilliant, charming tech founder again. He let out a loud, booming laugh. The sound was incredibly fake and hollow, echoing awkwardly against the dead silence of the ballroom. Nobody in the crowd laughed with him. The guests simply stared, watching the performance unfold with morbid fascination. Jamal stepped closer to me, raising his hands in a theatrical gesture of surrender. He projected his voice so the first few rows of tables could hear him without the microphone. Okay, you got me, he said, forcing another chuckle. He turned slightly toward the audience, flashing that bright, manufactured smile. Let us give a round of applause for my beautiful, brilliant bride, everyone. She always knows how to command a room. We have been pulling pranks on each other all week to cut the tension, and she definitely just won the grand prize. He turned back to me, reaching out with his right hand. His fingers stretched toward the microphone I was holding tight against my chest. His eyes were wide and frantic, silently begging me to play along. Baby, you are incredibly stressed, he said, lowering his voice slightly, but maintaining the fake cheerful tone. Wedding planning is exhausting, and you have been running on empty for days. You are letting the nerves get the best of you right now. Let us just put the mic down. We can go to the back room, grab a glass of water, and talk about this in private. The catering staff is ready to serve the main course, and we are keeping our guests waiting. Let us go to the back, baby. Come on, give me the mic. He took another step forward, invading my personal space. He reached for the microphone again, expecting me to simply hand it over. He expected the old Kiara to surface. He genuinely believed that if he applied enough public pressure, if he painted me as a stressed-out, hysterical bride, I would fold. He thought my desire to avoid public embarrassment would override my need for basic respect. He thought I would prioritize his fragile ego over my own dignity. He was wrong. I did not hand him the microphone. I did not step back. I stood my ground, planting my heels firmly onto the platform floor. When his fingers grazed the metal handle of the mic, I swiftly pulled it out of his reach, holding it firmly in my left hand. I looked him dead in the eyes and let the silence stretch between us. I watched the fake smile slowly slide right off his face. The charismatic tech founder mask cracked, revealing the terrified little boy hiding underneath. He could see the absolute zero in my eyes. There was no love left for him to manipulate. There was no sympathy left for him to exploit. I raised the microphone back to my lips, keeping my gaze locked entirely on his sweating, terrified face. I am not stressed, Jamal, I said, my voice ringing out crystal clear across the silent room. I am not suffering from wedding jitters, and I am certainly not playing a prank on our guests. Do not insult my intelligence, and do not insult the intelligence of every single person sitting in this room by pretending this is some sort of joke. We are not going to a back room. We are not going to have a quiet private chat so you can manipulate me behind closed doors. The time for private conversations ended the exact second you allowed your mother to treat my parents like unwanted garbage in my own building. Jamal flinched as if I had physically struck him. He looked over his shoulder at the VIP table, silently pleading for someone to intervene, but nobody moved. Vivian was staring down at her empty plate, her face a mask of bitter humiliation. Lauren was frantically whispering something to Malik, but neither of them dared to make eye contact with the stage. They were entirely useless to him now. They had relied on his ability to control me, and he was failing spectacularly. He turned back to me, his voice dropping to a desperate raw whisper that the microphone barely caught. "Kiara, please," he begged, his eyes filling with actual tears. "You are destroying my life. Harrison is sitting right there. The entire board is watching us. If you do this, my company is dead. I will lose everything. Please just walk away with me." I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of disgust. He was not apologizing for disrespecting my father. He was not apologizing for allowing his mother to humiliate my mother. He was not asking for my forgiveness. He was only begging me to save his public image. He cared more about the opinions of a few wealthy investors than he cared about the woman standing in front of him. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to retreat. I held the microphone steady, making sure every word I spoke next would be heard clearly by the investors he was so desperate to impress. "Talk about what, Jamal?" I asked, my voice projecting effortlessly. "Should we talk about your tech startup? The one you just told Harrison Sterling is on the verge of revolutionizing the industry. Let us talk about your company. Let us talk about how your business has been functionally bankrupt for the last 8 months." The murmurs erupted instantly. I watched Harrison Sterling lean forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Jamal. The other investors at table 4 began exchanging rapid, furious whispers. Jamal let out a strangled gasp, shaking his head frantically, as if he could physically deny the words leaving my mouth. "Stop talking," he pleaded, holding his hands up to his face. "Please, Kiara, do not do this to me." I ignored his pathetic whimpers. "Your mother wanted everyone to know that my parents are working-class people?" I continued, gesturing toward Vivian. "She wanted to make sure everyone in this room knew that my father carried mail and my mother was a nurse. She thought that diminished my value. But what Vivian does not know is that her golden son has been lying to her and everyone else in Atlanta high society. You have not closed a single legitimate contract all year, Jamal. The only reason your startup has not been completely liquidated by the bank is because of your primary angel investor." I took another step toward him, driving the final nail into his corporate coffin. "You spent the last 6 months bragging about that anonymous venture capital firm that stepped in to keep you afloat. The firm that pays for your tailored suits, your extravagant networking dinners, and the expensive watches you wear to pretend you are a success. You told everyone it was a prestigious blind LLC that believed in your genius. But that LLC is entirely owned and operated by me. I am your angel investor, Jamal. I am the only reason you are not standing in an unemployment line right now." Jamal collapsed. He did not literally fall to the floor, but his entire posture crumbled. His shoulders slumped, his chest caved in, and he looked physically ill. The murmuring from the investor tables had turned into outright hostility. Harrison Sterling stood up from his chair, throwing his napkin onto the table in disgust. He did not need to hear another word. The fraud was exposed. The grand illusion of Jamal the tech visionary was dead. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the VIP table. Lauren pushed her chair back and rushed toward the stage. Her pale face was flushed with manufactured outrage. She could not stand seeing the power dynamic flip so violently. The white tears she kept weaponized and ready were already spilling down her cheeks. "Kiara, this is enough!" Lauren cried out, stopping at the base of the platform. She pressed her hands to her chest, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. You are ruining a beautiful family union. You are destroying Jamal over a silly seating chart. Please stop being so cruel. Think about the family. I turned my gaze away from the broken man in front of me and locked eyes with his sister-in-law. Lauren had always used her fragility as a shield to protect her vicious classism, but her tears meant absolutely nothing to me now. Cruel Lauren, I asked, raising an eyebrow. You want to talk about being cruel to the family? Let us talk about what my forensic accountant found when I ordered a deep dive into Jamal's business accounts last week. Let us talk about the family union. Lauren froze. Her fake tears stopped immediately. Her hands slowly dropped from her chest. Malik, who had been sitting quietly at the table, suddenly sat bolt upright, his eyes darting toward his wife. You want to protect Jamal? I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy air. Then maybe you should explain to him why $30,000 of the angel investment funds I wired to his company last month ended up in your personal checking account. Malik stood up so fast his chair tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. What did she just say? Malik demanded, his voice booming across the room. He looked at Lauren, who was now backing away from the stage, her face entirely devoid of color. I kept the microphone steady, ensuring Vivian and Jamal heard every single syllable. Lauren and Malik have been systematically siphoning money from your business accounts for months, Jamal. Every time I injected capital to save your sinking company, your brother and his wife skimmed it off the top to pay for their country club dues and designer handbags. They have been stealing the very money you have been begging me for. The implosion was instantaneous. Malik grabbed Lauren by the arm, demanding an explanation while she stammered incoherently. Vivian let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutching her chest as she watched her two perfect sons turn on each other. Jamal stared at his brother, his face twisting with a fresh, agonizing layer of betrayal. The supposedly elite, flawless family was currently tearing each other apart in the middle of my ballroom, completely destroyed by their own greed and entitlement. I stood on the stage, watching the absolute wreckage. The carefully constructed facade of Atlanta high society had burned to ash right in front of my eyes. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, sharp air of absolute liberation. The shouting between Lauren and Malik grew louder, echoing off the crystal chandeliers above us. They were tearing each other apart over the stolen money, completely ignoring the audience of 200 stunned guests. But my focus shifted away from them and settled entirely back onto Jamal. He was not looking at his brother. He was watching Harrison Sterling. The billionaire venture capitalist was buttoning his custom suit jacket, shaking his head in absolute disgust, and signaling his team of executives to head for the exit. That was the exact trigger Jamal needed to completely lose his grip on reality. The prospect of losing that Silicon Valley funding broke something fundamental inside his brain. He suddenly spun around and looked back up at me on the stage. His face, which had been pale with sheer terror just seconds ago, suddenly contorted into a wide, manic grin. It was a terrifying, unnatural expression that did not reach his eyes. He leaped up the short steps of the stage, taking them two at a time. He did not try to snatch my microphone away this time. Instead, he threw his arms wide open, projecting his voice across the chaotic ballroom, and began clapping his hands together loudly. "Wow, okay, round of applause for my beautiful wife, everyone," Jamal yelled. A burst of nervous, erratic laughter bubbled out of his throat. The sound was harsh and desperate, echoing awkwardly against the stunned silence of the remaining guests. Nobody clapped with him. Nobody even smiled. "I told you all she was a powerhouse?" Jamal continued, pointing at me with a shaking finger. He was sweating profusely now. Beads of moisture gathered on his forehead, ruining the flawless grooming he had spent hours perfecting this morning. She really had me going for a second. What an incredible performance. Just brilliant, baby. Really top-tier acting. I stared at him in absolute disbelief. He was actually trying to gaslight a room of 200 people. He was standing in the middle of a destroyed reception hall, watching his brother and sister-in-law scream at each other over embezzlement, and he was trying to pretend that my exposure of his bankruptcy and his mother's blatant classism was an elaborate piece of wedding day performance art. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. He genuinely believed that if he smiled hard enough and laughed loud enough, he could force reality to bend to his will. Jamal closed the distance between us, stepping aggressively into my personal space. His hands were trembling violently as he reached out, attempting to grab my waist and pull me into a fake, affectionate embrace. I took one sharp step backward, keeping the microphone firmly in my grip and completely denying him the physical contact he desperately needed to sell his lie. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly plastered it back on. He leaned in close, dropping his head down as if he were whispering a sweet nothing into his new bride's ear. The scent of his expensive designer cologne mixed with the sour smell of fierce sweat hit my nose. "Baby, you made your point," Jamal whispered fiercely through gritted teeth. His jaw barely moved so the investors lingering near the doors would not see his anger. "You are incredibly stressed. You are letting the wedding nerves get the absolute best of you. We are all exhausted. Let us just put the microphone down. Let us go to the back room and talk about this in private before you do permanent, unfixable damage to my brand." I did not flinch. I did not lower my gaze. I looked into the eyes of the man I had spent 2 years supporting physically, emotionally, and financially. I saw nothing but a terrified social climber begging for a lifeline. "My brand," I repeated out loud, pulling the microphone back up to my lips so every single guest in the Oakwood Manor ballroom could hear his ridiculous priority. "Your brand, Jamal." He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second, a silent plea for me to stop talking. But the time for silence was over. "You want to take this conversation private?" I asked, my voice steady and unwavering. "You want me to step into a back room so you can manipulate me behind closed doors? You want to corner me where there are no witnesses so you can tell me I am acting crazy or emotional or hysterical? You want to use the privacy of a bridal suite to convince me that I should forgive your mother for hiding my hardworking parents by the restrooms?" Jamal opened his eyes, his expression shifting from fake amusement to genuine panic. "Kiara, please do not do this," he begged, his voice cracking. "Just walk off the stage with me. We can fix this. I can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "There is nothing left to fix, Jamal. The foundation of this entire relationship was built on my money and your lies. You stood there at the VIP table and agreed with Vivian when she said my mother and father looked too poor to sit with your family. You drank champagne while the man who broke his back sorting mail to put me through college was shoved into a dark hallway. You did not want to take things private when your mother was publicly disrespecting my bloodline. You only want privacy now because the spotlight is finally shining on your failures." The remaining investors who had paused near the exit doors began to walk out. Harrison Sterling did not even look back. The heavy mahogany doors shut behind him with a resounding thud, sealing the fate of Jamal's tech startup forever. Jamal watched the doors close, and a low, wounded sound escaped his throat. The manic energy that had propelled him onto the stage completely evaporated, leaving behind a defeated, hollow man. He dropped his arms to his sides, his shoulders slumping heavily under his custom-tailored jacket. "You are ruining me," Jamal whispered, staring blankly at the closed doors. "You are taking away everything I worked for." I laughed, a short, dry sound that held no humor. "What exactly did you work for, Jamal?" "I paid for the car you drove to the pitch meetings. I paid the rent for the office space where you pretended to be a CEO. My anonymous LLC provided the only capital your business ever saw. The only thing you worked for was maintaining an illusion of wealth to impress people who do not even care about you. And the moment that illusion was threatened, you were perfectly willing to sacrifice my dignity to protect it." He looked up at me, his eyes red and rimmed with angry tears. "You are doing this on purpose to humiliate me. You could have told me about your corporate holdings in private. You could have told me you owned this venue weeks ago. But you waited until today just to destroy me in front of my mother." "I did not destroy you, Jamal," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I simply stopped paying for your costume. I stopped funding your fake reality. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that looking elite was more important than protecting the woman you claimed to love. Public humiliation is not a punishment I designed for you. It is simply the natural consequence of your own arrogance being dragged out into the light." I turned my body slightly, ensuring I was addressing the entire room as much as I was addressing him. I refuse to be the silent bankroll for a family of social parasites. I refuse to shrink myself down so your fragile ego can feel large. And I absolutely refuse to walk into a back room and negotiate my self-worth with a coward. Talk about what Jamal, I asked the question, letting it hang in the heavy air of the ballroom. Should we talk about your tech startup? The one you just told Harrison Sterling is on the verge of revolutionizing the entire logistics industry. Let us talk about your company. Let us talk about how your business has been functionally bankrupt for the last 8 months. The murmurs erupted instantly. I watched Harrison Sterling lean forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as he stared at the back of Jamal's head. The other venture capitalists at Table 4 began exchanging rapid, furious whispers. Men who managed billion-dollar portfolios did not take kindly to the word bankrupt being thrown around at a wedding they were invited to attend as prospective financiers. Jamal let out a strangled gasp, shaking his head frantically as if he could physically deny the words leaving my mouth. "Stop talking," he pleaded, holding his hands up to his face. "Please, Kiara, do not do this to me." I ignored his pathetic whimpers. "Your mother wanted everyone to know that my parents are working-class people." I continued gesturing broadly toward Vivian, who was now clutching her chest. She wanted to make sure everyone in this room knew that my father carried mail and my mother was a nurse. She thought that diminished my value to this prestigious family. She thought it made me small. But what Vivian does not know, what none of you know, is that her golden son has not closed a single legitimate contract all year. The only reason your startup has not been completely liquidated by the bank is because of your primary angel investor. I took another step toward him, driving the final nail into his corporate coffin. You spent the last 6 months bragging about that anonymous venture capital firm that stepped in to keep you afloat. You told everyone it was a prestigious blind LLC that believed in your unique genius. You threw networking parties to celebrate their seed money. You used their capital to pay for your tailored suits, your extravagant client dinners, and the expensive imported cars you used to pretend you are a massive success in Atlanta. But that LLC is entirely owned and operated by me. I let the silence swallow the room before delivering the fatal blow. I am your angel investor, Jamal. I am the only reason you are not standing in an unemployment line right now. Every dime you have spent pretending to be a titan of industry came directly from the bank account of the woman whose parents you just tried to shove next to a public restroom. Jamal collapsed. He did not literally fall to the floor, but his entire posture crumbled. His shoulders slumped, his chest caved in, and he looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the DJ booth to keep himself upright. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The absolute reality of his situation had finally crushed the breath out of him. He was completely dependent on me. His entire identity, his wealth, his status, his company, it was all an illusion funded by my quiet labor. The reaction from the investor tables was immediate and brutal. Harrison Sterling stood up from his chair. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the glossy wedding program Jamal had so proudly designed, and dropped it onto his empty plate like a piece of trash. He turned to his associates and gave a sharp nod. The deception was exposed. The grand illusion of Jamal the tech visionary was dead. The investors realized in that exact moment that the financial health reports Jamal had presented to them just weeks prior were entirely falsified. He had cooked the books to secure their attendance tonight, hoping to use my venue and my money to trap them into signing binding investment contracts. He had fed them fraudulent data. Harrison Sterling did not say a word to Jamal. He did not need to. In the tight-knit, high-stakes world of Atlanta technology and venture capital, reputation was everything. Word of this level of financial fraud would spread through the executive suites and boardrooms before the sun even came up tomorrow. Sterling buttoned his jacket, turned his back on the stage, and began walking toward the exit. His entire team of executives followed him without hesitation. Jamal watched them leave, and a low, wounded sound escaped his throat. The manic energy that had propelled him onto the stage completely evaporated, leaving behind a defeated, hollow man. He knew exactly what Harrison Sterling's departure meant. He was blacklisted. No reputable firm in the state would ever take a meeting with him again. His startup was completely and irrevocably dead. "You are ruining me," Jamal whispered, staring blankly at the heavy mahogany doors closing behind the investors. "You are taking away everything I worked for." I laughed, a short, dry sound that held absolutely no warmth. "What exactly did you work for, Jamal?" "I paid for the car you drove to the pitch meetings. I paid the rent for the office space where you pretended to be a CEO. My anonymous LLC provided the only capital your business ever saw. The only thing you worked for was maintaining an illusion of wealth to impress people who do not even care about you. And the moment that illusion was threatened, you were perfectly willing to sacrifice my dignity to protect it." He looked up at me, his eyes red and rimmed with angry tears. "You are doing this on purpose to humiliate me. You could have told me about your corporate holdings in private. You could have told me you owned this venue weeks ago, but you waited until today just to destroy me in front of my mother." "I did not destroy you, Jamal," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I simply stopped paying for your costume. I stopped funding your fake reality. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that looking elite was more important than protecting the woman you claimed to love. Public humiliation is not a punishment I designed for you. It is simply the natural consequence of your own arrogance being dragged out into the light." I turned my body slightly, ensuring I was addressing the entire room as much as I was addressing him. I refuse to be the silent bankroll for a family of social parasites. I refuse to shrink myself down so your fragile ego can feel large. The crowd was completely captivated by the destruction happening on the stage. The wealthy friends Vivian had invited to show off her son's supposed success were now witnessing the total annihilation of her family's social standing. Vivian sat frozen in her seat at the VIP table, her hands trembling as she stared at the empty chairs where Harrison Sterling and his team had been sitting just moments ago. The prestigious high society image she had spent decades cultivating was being shredded to pieces, and she was utterly powerless to stop it. Jamal took a shaky breath, wiping a hand across his sweating forehead. He tried one last desperate maneuver. He tried to appeal to my sense of loyalty. "Kiara, we can fix the business," he pleaded, his voice raw. "You own the LLC, you have the capital. If you just release the next round of funding, we can rebuild, we can rebrand. I can explain the discrepancies to the board. Just do not pull the plug on the company. Please, do not take away my livelihood." "You mean my livelihood," I corrected him, stepping closer to the edge of the platform. "Because you have not produced a single profitable product since the day we met. And no, Jamal, I will not be releasing the next round of funding. My lawyers have already drawn up the paperwork to legally dissolve the LLC's financial commitment to your startup. By Monday morning, your accounts will be frozen. By Wednesday, you will have to declare bankruptcy. The ride is over. The bank is closed." He stared at me as if I had just plunged a knife into his chest. The reality of his impending financial ruin finally registered in his eyes. He had nothing. No investors, no company, no money, and no wife to bail him out. He was completely ruined. I watched him struggle to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his loss. For a man who had built his entire identity around the perception of wealth, losing access to that wealth was worse than a physical death. He had traded the genuine love and support of a loyal partner for the fleeting approval of elitist strangers, and now he had absolutely neither. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating as 200 people watched Jamal face the complete collapse of his entire world. The heavy, suffocating silence did not last long. It was shattered by the sharp, grating screech of a heavy wooden chair being violently pushed back against the hardwood floor. I shifted my gaze past Jamal's trembling shoulders to see Lauren standing up at the VIP table. Her pale face was flushed with a frantic, manufactured outrage. She could not stand the sudden violent shift in the room's power dynamic. She had spent the entire morning treating my bridesmaids like the help and dismissing my mother as a peasant. She thrived on the unearned superiority this family provided her. Now that the social hierarchy had been forcefully inverted, she was panicking. Lauren practically sprinted toward the stage, her pastel silk dress fluttering around her ankles. The white tears she kept weaponized and holstered for moments exactly like this were already spilling down her cheeks in perfect glistening drops. She stopped at the base of the raised platform and pressed both hands over her heart, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. It was a masterful theatrical performance designed specifically to make me look like an unhinged bully. "Kiara, this is enough!" Lauren cried out, her voice trembling with artificial heartbreak. "You are ruining a beautiful family union. You are destroying Jamal over a silly seating chart. Please stop being so cruel. Think about the family. We welcomed you with open arms and you are tearing us apart." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. If I had not spent the last 2 years watching her casually insult my culture while quietly living off my money, I might have actually believed she was distressed. But I knew exactly what she was doing. She was attempting to use her fragility as a shield. She wanted the remaining guests to look at her crying face and conclude that I was a monster for defending my own parents. She was leveraging her tears to paint me as the aggressor, hoping to shame me into silence. I did not lower the microphone. I did not soften my tone. "Cruel Lauren," I asked, raising a single eyebrow. "You want to talk to me about being cruel to this family. You want to stand there and cry about a beautiful family union while my parents, the people who paid for the food you are digesting right now, are still standing by the kitchen doors." Lauren sniffled, wiping her eyes carefully to avoid smudging her expensive makeup. She took a step closer, looking up at me as if she were the ultimate victim. "We are trying to love you, Kiara, but you are making it impossible. You are holding a financial favor over our heads to justify ruining a wedding. We accepted your help with our mortgage because we thought you wanted to be part of us. We did not know your money came with such toxic, aggressive conditions." I let out a sharp laugh. The sound cut through her pathetic performance instantly. "You think this is just about the $40,000 I gave you to save your house from foreclosure, Lauren? You think that is the only financial favor you have been taking from me?" Lauren froze. Her fake tears stopped immediately. The wounded victim routine evaporated from her face, replaced by a sudden, stark look of genuine terror. Her hands slowly dropped from her chest. I turned my attention away from her and locked eyes with Malik. He was still sitting at the VIP table, but his posture had gone completely rigid. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. "Let us talk about the family union." I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy air of the ballroom. "Let us talk about what my forensic accountant found when I ordered a deep dive into Jamal's business accounts last week. Let us talk about exactly how you and Malik afford your luxury lifestyle." Malik stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. His eyes darted nervously between me, Jamal, and the exit doors. "What did she just say?" Malik demanded, his voice booming across the room in a desperate attempt to talk over me. He looked at Lauren, who was now backing away from the stage, her face entirely devoid of color. I kept the microphone steady, ensuring Vivian and Jamal heard every single syllable. "Every single month I wired capital from my LLC into Jamal's startup to keep it afloat. I thought I was paying for software development, server hosting, and operational costs. But it turns out your brother is a very creative chief financial officer, Jamal. My forensic team discovered dozens of ghost vendor payments in your ledgers. Invoices for consulting fees, marketing strategies, and digital assets that never actually existed." Jamal turned his head slowly, staring at his older brother. His jaw dropped. The realization was beginning to dawn on him, but he was too stunned to speak. "Those fake vendor accounts were not external," I stated, driving the final nail into the coffin of their brotherhood. "They were directly linked to a joint checking account owned exclusively by Malik and Lauren. You have been systematically siphoning money from your brother's failing business for 8 months. Every time I injected cash to save Jamal, you two skimmed 20% off the top. You stole from your own blood to pay for your country club dues, your designer handbags, and your lavish vacations to Cabo." The implosion was instantaneous. The collective gasp from the remaining wedding guests sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Jamal's shock morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, pointing a shaking finger at his brother. "You stole from me!" Jamal screamed, the veins bulging in his neck. "I was begging Harrison Sterling for pennies and you were stealing from my operating budget. I trusted you with the books, Malik." Malik held his hands up, taking a defensive step backward. "Bro, calm down. It is not what it sounds like. We were just taking my approved salary. The company owed me back pay. You said we would be rich." "Approved salary," Jamal roared, stepping off the platform and marching directly toward the VIP table. "You forged invoices. You took my angel investment money." Vivian let out a loud, dramatic wail. She clutched her diamond necklace, staring in absolute horror as her two perfect, successful sons turned on each other like rabid dogs. She looked at Lauren, who was currently trying to hide behind a massive floral arrangement. "You thief!" Vivian shrieked, pointing at her white daughter-in-law. "I knew you were no good. You came into this family and turned my boys against each other. You stole from my son to buy those tacky shoes." Lauren's polite, respectful facade vanished entirely. She glared at Vivian, her face twisting into a sneer of pure venom. "Do not you dare point your finger at me!" "Vivian," Loren snapped, her voice shrill and echoing across the ballroom. "You are just as broke as we are. You have been living off Malik and me for months. Who do you think paid for that ridiculous dress you are wearing? You sit around judging everyone else, acting like you are Atlanta royalty, but you do not have a dime to your name. You are nothing but a massive fraud." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Vivian screamed, lunging across the table. She grabbed the edge of a crystal water pitcher, looking entirely ready to hurl it at Lauren's head. "I brought you into high society." "High society?" Lauren laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "You do not even own your own car, Vivian." Malik grabbed Lauren by the arm, physically yanking her away from his mother. "Shut up, Lauren," he ordered, his face red with humiliation. "Just shut your mouth." "Do not tell me to shut up," Lauren screamed back, slapping his hand away. "Your brother is a failure. Your mother is a broke snob, and we are going to jail because of your stupid fake invoices." Jamal grabbed his brother by the lapels of his suit, shoving him hard against the edge of the velvet-draped table. Glasses tipped over, spilling champagne and water across the white linens. "You ruined my company!" Jamal shouted, spit flying from his lips. "You took my money!" "It was not your money," Malik yelled back, shoving Jamal off of him. "It was her money. You are just as much of a parasite as I am. You just found a richer woman to leech off of." I stood on the stage, watching the absolute wreckage of the family I had almost joined. The carefully constructed facade of their elite high society existence had burned to ash right in front of my eyes. They were screaming at each other, throwing insults, and exposing their deepest financial secrets to a room full of stunned wedding guests. They had completely forgotten about my parents standing by the kitchen doors. They had completely forgotten about their aesthetic and their visual cohesion. They were tearing each other apart, driven by greed, panic, and raw entitlement. I felt no pity for any of them. I felt no remorse for dropping the match that started the fire. I watched Vivian sobbing hysterically as her sons physically shoved each other over stolen money. I watched Lauren attempting to flee the venue, her expensive heels slipping on the polished floor. I felt only the clean, sharp air of absolute liberation. The heavy, suffocating weight I had been carrying for 2 years was finally gone. I was completely unburdened. I let them scream at each other for exactly 60 seconds. I stood on the raised platform and watched the chaos unfold, committing every detail to memory. Malik and Jamal were shoving each other against the velvet tablecloth. Lauren was crying over her ruined designer shoes while Vivian wailed about her destroyed social standing. They looked like absolute animals fighting over a scrap of meat. I wanted the 200 guests in the room to get a long, uninterrupted look at the real family behind the polished Instagram photos. When the 60 seconds were up, I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice cut through their pathetic squabbling like a steel blade. "That is enough." The sheer authority in my tone made all 4 of them freeze instantly. Jamal stopped grabbing his brother's lapels. Vivian choked on a sob. They turned to look up at me, their chests heaving, their expensive clothes rumpled and stained with spilled champagne. I looked down at the 12 people sitting and standing around the VIP banquet table. My gaze swept over Jamal's extended relatives, who had happily occupied the seats meant for my hardworking mother and father. "You thought my parents ruined your aesthetic?" I said, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I think you ruined my property value." I turned my head and locked eyes with Marcus, the general manager of Oakwood Manor. I gave him a single definitive nod. Marcus immediately raised his two-way radio to his mouth. Less than 2 seconds later, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung wide open. A dozen men in immaculate dark suits stepped into the reception hall. This was not the standard event staff. This was my private elite security detail, men who handled high-level corporate extractions and asset protection. They moved with terrifying silent synchronization, parting the sea of guest tables and marching directly toward the center of the room. Vivian realized what was happening first. Her eyes bulged as 4 massive security guards surrounded the VIP table. "Do not you dare touch me!" Vivian shrieked, backing away and pointing a shaking finger at the closest guard. "I know the mayor of Atlanta. I am a respected member of this community. You cannot throw me out of my own son's wedding." "Ma'am, please proceed to the exit," the head of security said. His voice was a deep, unyielding rumble. "You are currently trespassing on private property." Trespassing. Vivian screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical, ear-piercing pitch. She completely abandoned her refined high society persona. The polite, soft-spoken matriarch vanished, replaced by a vicious, thrashing woman. When a guard reached out to guide her by the elbow, she swung her heavy designer purse at his head. He effortlessly caught her wrist, securing her arm behind her back with practiced ease. "Let me go, you overgrown thug!" Vivian yelled, kicking her expensive heels against the polished floor. She hurled a string of vile, hateful obscenities at the guards, at me, and at the guests watching her. Every vile word she screamed only cemented her absolute social ruin. Lauren tried a different approach. She attempted to gather her silk skirt and walk out with her head held high, hoping to salvage a fraction of her dignity. But she was shaking so badly that her ankle twisted in her stiletto. She tripped, crashing hard into a tray of half-eaten appetizers. Malik did not even try to help his wife up. He was too busy arguing with a security guard who had clamped a massive hand onto his shoulder. The guards hoisted Lauren up by her arms and forcefully marched her and Malik down the center aisle. The extended relatives at the table did not put up a fight. They dropped their napkins, grabbed their purses, and scurried out ahead of the security team, keeping their heads down in utter shame. But Jamal did not run. Jamal did not fight the guards. Instead, Jamal completely broke. As 2 security officers approached him, Jamal dropped straight to his knees right there on the hardwood floor. He ignored the spilled champagne soaking into the knees of his custom tuxedo. He ignored his mother screaming obscenities as she was dragged out the doors. He crawled forward, closing the distance to the edge of the stage, and looked up at me with tears streaming freely down his face. "Kiara, please!" Jamal begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. "Please, I am begging you. Do not throw me out. I am your husband. I love you. We can fix this." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "We have not signed the marriage license yet, Jamal. And even if we had, my legal team would have it annulled by Monday morning based on your financial fraud. You are nothing to me." He reached out, his trembling fingers gripping the edge of the wooden platform. "I will do anything," he sobbed, completely abandoning his pride. "I will apologize to your parents. I will make my mother apologize. I will sit at the back table. Just do not take the company away. Do not take the funding. I have nothing else, Kiara. I am nothing without you." He was finally telling the truth. He was nothing without my money, my venue, and my protection. But his realization came far too late. "Security," I said into the microphone. "Remove this man from my building." The 2 guards stepped forward. They grabbed Jamal by his armpits and hoisted him off his knees with brutal efficiency. Jamal let out a loud, agonizing wail. He kicked his legs, trying to drag his feet along the floor to slow them down, begging and pleading for me to change my mind. As the guards dragged him backward down the main aisle, the final most devastating blow to his ego occurred. I looked out at the 200 guests remaining in the ballroom. Almost every single person had their smartphone out. The bright white flashes of camera lights strobed across the darkened room. The little red recording lights on dozens of phones blinked steadily. The wealthy guests he had tried so desperately to impress were filming his humiliating eviction. His college friends, his industry rivals, and his social climbing peers were all live streaming his absolute destruction. Jamal turned his head and saw the sea of camera lenses pointed directly at his crying, sweating face. He realized in that exact moment that this was not just a private breakup. This was a public execution. The footage of him being dragged out of his own wedding reception, sobbing and begging for money, would be on every social media platform in Atlanta before the night was over. His social standing was not just damaged, it was vaporized in high definition. No, Jamal screamed, trying to cover his face with his hands as the guards hauled him through the grand foyer. "Turn the cameras off! Stop recording me!" Nobody stopped. They kept filming as the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his frantic screams. The loud, definitive thud of the doors closing echoed through the silent ballroom. The VIP table was completely empty, save for the overturned chairs and spilled drinks. The toxic, parasitic family that had tried to erase my parents from my life had been systematically eradicated from my property. The trash had finally been taken out. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut at the back of the ballroom, and the sound echoed like a gunshot. Then came the absolute total silence. The frantic energy of Jamal begging, the shrieking of Vivian, and the chaotic scuffling of Lauren and Malik were completely gone. The toxic parasitic weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 2 entire years vanished along with them. I stood on the raised platform and let the silence wash over me. I closed my eyes and took a deep, slow breath. The air in the room literally felt lighter. I exhaled, releasing every ounce of tension, every forced smile, and every compromise I had ever made to shrink myself for that family. When I opened my eyes, I looked out at the 200 guests who were still staring at the stage, completely stunned by the flawless execution they had just witnessed. I turned to David, my DJ. He was standing behind his mixing board, looking at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep professional respect. I handed the microphone back to him. I did not need it to amplify my voice anymore. I had said exactly what needed to be said. I lifted the heavy silk layers of my custom wedding gown and stepped down from the platform. The sharp clicks of my heels against the hardwood floor broke the silence. As I walked down the center aisle, the guests instinctively parted for me. Nobody whispered. Nobody tried to stop me or ask questions. My college friends, my trusted corporate colleagues, and my loyal extended family members simply watched me walk with their eyes wide. They saw a woman who had just reclaimed her entire existence. I did not stop to speak to any of the venture capitalists or the high society acquaintances Jamal had invited. My focus was entirely on the back of the room. I walked straight past the ruined VIP banquet table where spilled champagne was currently soaking into the velvet linens. I marched directly toward the kitchen swing doors, where the cramped little overflow table sat in the shadows. My parents, Joseph and Beatrice, were standing exactly where I had left them, but they no longer looked like unwanted guests shoved into a corner. They stood tall, leaning against each other. My father had his arm wrapped tightly around my mother's waist. As I closed the final few feet between us, the stern protective mask my father always wore completely melted away. His dark, weathered face broke into a massive, radiant smile. My mother pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were not tears of humiliation or sorrow. They were tears of absolute, overwhelming pride. I dropped the heavy skirts of my gown and threw my arms around my father's neck. He caught me instantly, wrapping his strong, calloused arms around my back and lifting me off my feet just like he did when I was a little girl. He buried his face in my shoulder and let out a deep, booming laugh that shook his entire chest. "I am so sorry, Daddy," I whispered fiercely into his suit jacket. I am so sorry I ever let them treat you like that. I should have stopped it the second they disrespected you. My father set me down gently and pulled back, gripping my shoulders. He looked me dead in the eyes, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. Do not you ever apologize for today, Kiara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You stood up there, and you showed the whole world exactly who raised you. You did not let them break your spirit. I have never been more proud to be your father than I am right in this very minute. My mother stepped forward and pulled me into a fierce embrace. She smelled of the familiar lavender lotion she had worn my entire life. My beautiful, strong girl, she murmured, kissing my cheek. You took your power back. You took your life back. We are so proud of you. I pulled away and took my father's rough hand in my right hand. I took my mother's soft hand in my left. We are not staying by the restrooms, I said, giving their hands a firm squeeze. We are taking up space. I turned around and led my parents away from the shadows. We walked hand in hand straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. I signaled to Marcus, my general manager, who was standing by the bar. Marcus snapped his fingers, and the elite security team immediately moved in to clear the debris. They swiftly pulled the chairs away from the 12-seat VIP banquet table. They rolled the massive table completely off the dance floor, shoving the remnants of Jamal's fake elite aesthetic into a dark corner where it belonged. They cleared the absolute center of the room just for us. I walked my parents directly into the middle of the polished dance floor, placing them right under the brilliant glow of the crystal chandelier. The remaining guests had all turned in their seats, watching us with bated breath. The tension in the room was still thick, a lingering shockwave from the brutal confrontation. It was time to break it completely. I looked up at the DJ platform and caught David's eye. He held up the microphone, offering it to me one last time. I shook my head and signaled for him to turn his speakers back on. I did not need a microphone for what I was about to say. I just needed my chest and my heart. I turned to face the crowd of guests. I looked at the tables filled with my loyal friends, my supportive coworkers, and my loud, beautiful extended family who had flown in on budget airlines and booked cheap hotel rooms just to support my happiness. They were the people who actually mattered. The wedding is officially canceled, I announced, projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the back walls. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. But I own this venue, I continued, a massive, genuine smile breaking across my face. And the premium open bar has already been fully funded. The catering staff in the back has a 5-course meal ready to serve, and I absolutely refuse to let good food or top-shelf liquor go to waste. The nervous chuckles turned into actual laughter. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that Vivian and Jamal had forced upon this room shattered instantly. Tonight we do not care about aesthetics, I shouted, my voice full of joy and unburdened freedom. Tonight we do not care about impressing investors or fitting into high society. Tonight we celebrate the people who actually love and respect us. We celebrate real loyalty. We celebrate family. So get out of your seats, grab a drink, and let us have a party. I turned toward the DJ booth and pointed directly at David. Hit it, David. David grinned, flashed me a thumbs up, and dropped his hand onto the soundboard. He did not play the soft, pretentious jazz that Jamal had meticulously curated for his networking event. David dropped a heavy, classic, soulful R&B track. The rich, vibrant bass line pumped through the state-of-the-art speakers, shaking the floorboards and filling the massive ballroom with pure, undeniable energy. The transformation of the room was explosive. The stiff, formal posture of the guests vanished. My aunts and uncles immediately jumped out of their seats, cheering loudly and clapping to the beat. My college friends abandoned their tables and rushed the bar, grabbing fresh glasses of champagne and cheering my name. The waiters, who had been standing frozen against the walls, suddenly sprang into action, emerging from the kitchen with massive trays of hot appetizers and fresh cocktails, their faces split into wide, relieved smiles. The stuffy, stressful, high-stakes networking event was completely dead. In its place, a genuine, vibrant, deeply soulful family celebration was born. My father laughed, spun my mother around, and pulled her into a smooth, synchronized two-step right in the middle of the dance floor. I watched them move together, their rented clothes completely irrelevant against the sheer joy radiating from their faces. They belonged in the spotlight, and I had finally put them there. I lifted the heavy layers of my wedding dress, kicking off my expensive designer heels. I left the shoes abandoned on the edge of the dance floor and stepped onto the polished wood in my bare feet. I felt lighter than air. The restrictive, suffocating corset of the gown suddenly felt like a victory dress. I walked into the center of the dance floor and threw my arms up, letting the music and the overwhelming love in the room wash over me completely. My friends rushed the floor surrounding me in a tight circle of joyous dancing and loud celebration. We sang at the top of our lungs, jumping and spinning under the chandelier. There were no fake smiles. There was no worrying about camera angles or social cohesion. There was only the raw, beautiful reality of a woman who had just dodged the biggest bullet of her entire life. I danced with my father, my bare feet spinning across the floor as he twirled me around. I danced with my mother, who was laughing so hard she had to hold her sides. I drank champagne straight from the bottle with my best friends, tossing my head back and letting the cold, bubbly liquid spill down my chin. I did not care about ruining my professional makeup or messing up my perfectly pinned hair. Every time I looked toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room, I felt a deep, profound sense of gratitude. I had not lost a husband today. I had gained my entire life back. I had protected the empire I built with my own two hands, and I had fiercely defended the dignity of the people who gave me the strength to build it. The party raged on for hours. We ate the 5-course meal, we drank the bar dry, and we danced until our feet literally ached. It was the most spectacular, beautiful celebration of my entire life, and it had absolutely nothing to do with getting married. It was a celebration of radical self-respect, of unapologetic boundaries, and of the absolute irrefutable truth that nobody, no matter how elite they pretend to be, gets to make my family sit in the dark. The morning sun hitting my bedroom window on Monday felt entirely different than it had just 48 hours prior. I woke up well-rested, completely unbothered, and possessing a profound sense of clarity. There was no wedding ring on my finger. There was no chaotic mother-in-law making demands about my schedule. There was only the quiet, absolute peace of a woman who had successfully surgically removed a tumor from her life. I got out of bed, took a long, hot shower, and dressed in a sharp-tailored emerald green suit. I did not put on the soft pastel colors Jamal always preferred me to wear. I dressed like the executive I actually was. By 9 o'clock in this morning, I was sitting in the sleek glass-walled conference room of my primary legal counsel in downtown Atlanta. My lead corporate attorney, David, poured me a cup of black coffee and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table. He had spent his entire Sunday drafting the execution orders. We have isolated every single financial tether connecting your holding company to his startup, David said, his voice strictly business. Because you provided the initial seed money through the Blind LLC, we have the contractual right to halt all future disbursements at our discretion. But more importantly, the forensic accounting report you authorized proves that the company officers, namely Jamal and his brother Malik, have been actively embezzling operating funds for personal use. That constitutes a massive breach of fiduciary duty. It gives us the legal authority to not only sever the funding immediately, but to call in the existing debts and demand immediate repayment of the misused capital. I picked up my pen, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I did not feel an ounce of hesitation. I flipped to the final page of the master dissolution agreement. The paper outlined the absolute termination of my LLC's financial commitment to Jamal's company. With one steady, fluid motion, I signed my name. I legally severed his lifeline. Execute it, I told David, sliding the folder back across the table. All of it. Freeze the commercial accounts. Terminate the lease on his office building, since my company owns the commercial property management group that holds his contract. Send the breach of fiduciary duty notices directly to his business email and copy his brother. I want them both fully aware that the bank is closed. David nodded, snapping the folder shut. The orders will hit their inboxes in 15 minutes. The bank freezes will be active by 10:30. I walked out of the law office and stepped into the bustling Atlanta morning feeling invincible. I did not turn off my phone. I simply handed it to my personal assistant and instructed her to forward any communication from Jamal, Vivian Loren, or Malik directly to the legal team. I went to my actual corporate office, a building Jamal had never bothered to ask the location of, and I went to work. The corporate execution happened with terrifying speed. At exactly 10:15, Jamal tried to use his company credit card to pay for a damage control breakfast meeting he had desperately scheduled with a minor investor. The card was declined. By 10:30, he received a frantic call from his payroll manager. The company operating accounts had been completely frozen. The digital dashboards showed a balance of zero. By 11 o'clock, the official legal notices from my attorneys landed in his inbox, detailing the exact amounts of money Malik and Lauren had siphoned and citing it as the primary legal cause for the immediate termination of all angel investment funding. I was told later by a former contractor who worked in his building that Jamal physically collapsed in the middle of his open concept office. He had to sit on the floor hyperventilating as the reality of his situation crushed him. He tried to call his brother demanding the stolen money back, but Malik was not answering. Malik was too busy dealing with his own impending disaster. Without my capital, Jamal's startup folded in less than 48 hours. He had no cash reserves. He had no backup investors. He had spent every dime of his operating budget projecting the image of a wealthy tech founder instead of actually building a functional product. When the property management group served him with an immediate eviction notice for non-payment of his commercial lease, his few remaining employees packed up their laptops and walked out the door. By Wednesday morning, the sleek modern office space he had bragged about for 2 years was locked entirely empty and dark. The financial ruin was absolute, but the social fallout was even more devastating. Atlanta is a massive city, but its high society and tech circles are incredibly small and brutally unforgiving. The guests who had attended our reception did exactly what I knew they would do. They uploaded the videos. By Sunday afternoon, multiple high-definition recordings of the Oakwood Manor disaster were circulating across social media platforms, group chats, and local blogs. There were videos of Vivian kicking and screaming obscenities while being hauled out by my security guards, her designer dress twisted, and her pristine image completely shattered. There were crystal-clear recordings of me standing on the stage, exposing Malik and Lauren for stealing from the company. And worst of all for Jamal, there were multiple angles of him dropping to his knees in his custom tuxedo, sobbing and begging me for money, while Harrison Sterling and the venture capital board walked out the door in disgust. The internet showed absolutely no mercy. The videos went viral locally and then nationally. Jamal was officially branded as the fake tech CEO who tried to hide his hardworking in-laws by the restrooms. The public humiliation was absolute. His elite friends, the men and women who had happily drank his imported liquor and attended his lavish networking parties, dropped him instantly. Nobody wanted to be associated with a financial fraud, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of such a spectacular viral embarrassment. When Jamal reached out to his so-called brothers in the tech community, asking for emergency bridge loans, or even just a character reference, his calls went straight to voicemail. They blocked his number. They removed him from their country club group chats. They erased him from their social ecosystem as if he had never existed. Harrison Sterling released a very brief, very polite public statement to an Atlanta business journal, clarifying that his venture capital firm had never formally partnered with Jamal's startup, and that they maintained strict ethical standards for any founders they chose to engage with. It was the ultimate corporate kiss of death. Jamal's name was toxic. The consequences rained down on his family with equal brutality. Vivian, the woman who had judged my parents for their rented suits and honest labor, became an immediate social pariah. The women in her elite social circles, the ones she played tennis with and gossiped with over expensive brunches, completely froze her out. They had seen the videos. They knew she was broke, living off her sons, and entirely dependent on the woman she had tried to humiliate. Vivian could not even show her face at her usual restaurants without hearing the whispers and seeing the pointed stares. Her entire identity was built on superiority, and I had publicly stripped her of every single credential she claimed to hold. Lauren and Malik faced the harshest reality of all. Because my legal team formally cited their embezzlement as the cause for the funding termination, Jamal turned all of his rage onto his brother. The family turned on itself like a pack of starving wolves. Jamal threatened to press criminal charges against Malik for the stolen funds. But the threat was useless because the money was already gone. Lauren had spent it all attempting to keep up appearances. The $40,000 I had personally given them to save their Buckhead home from foreclosure was nothing but a temporary bandage on a massive bleeding wound. Without the ability to skim money off the top of Jamal's business accounts, they could not afford their mortgage, their car payments, or their luxury lifestyle. Within a month, the bank resumed the foreclosure process. Lauren was forced to pack her designer bags and move out of the neighborhood she had been so desperate to impress. They were left with absolutely nothing but mountains of debt, shattered relationships, and a ruined public image that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They had tried to build a kingdom by stepping on the backs of my family, and I had simply pulled the ground out from under their feet. Exactly 7 days after the heavy mahogany doors of Oakwood Manor slammed shut, sealing the fate of Jamal and his parasitic family, my assistant forwarded a message that made me pause. Jamal had been calling my corporate office incessantly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails with the reception desk. When that failed, he resorted to sending handwritten letters through his newly appointed bankruptcy lawyer. He begged for 5 minutes. He claimed he just needed 5 minutes to explain himself, to apologize, to seek some kind of closure. I did not owe him closure, but I decided to grant the meeting. I did not agree to see him for his peace of mind. I agreed to the meeting for my own final confirmation that the ghost of the man I almost married was truly entirely gone. We agreed to meet at a quiet, independently owned coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta. I arrived early, dressed in a sharp beige trench coat and comfortable tailored slacks. I took a seat at a small corner table with a clear, unobstructed view of the front door. I ordered a simple black coffee and I waited. I felt no anxiety. My heart rate was perfectly steady. The chaotic, overwhelming weight of the previous 2 years had been completely lifted from my shoulders, and I was simply existing in the quiet aftermath of my own liberation. When the glass door of the cafe chimed and Jamal walked inside, I almost did not recognize him. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. The arrogant, broad-shouldered tech visionary who had demanded the best seats at a VIP banquet table was completely gone. The man who walked toward my corner table was a hollowed-out shell. He was not wearing one of the imported custom-tailored suits I had unknowingly paid for. He wore a faded gray hoodie and a pair of wrinkled denim jeans. His posture was severely hunched, his shoulders caving inward as if he were trying to make himself physically smaller. His eyes were bloodshot with deep dark bags dragging down the delicate skin of his face. He looked exactly like a man who had lost his company, his social circle, his financial safety net, and his entire identity in the span of 1 single week. He pulled out the chair across from me, moving slowly as if all the energy had been drained from his bones. He sat down and stared at his hands resting on the wooden table. He did not order a drink. He did not look around the room. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound between us was the soft hum of the espresso machine and the low chatter of other patrons going about their morning routines. Then the dam broke. He started talking, and the words tumbled out of his mouth in a pathetic, desperate rush. "Kiara." "Please," Jamal started, his voice cracking heavily on the very first syllable. "I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I lost my mind. I completely lost my mind trying to keep up with the investors and the pressure." He leaned forward, clasping his hands together in a prayer-like gesture, resting them on the edge of the table. He did not look me in the eye. He stared at my coffee cup as he unleashed a frantic, chaotic stream of excuses. He blamed the competitive, toxic nature of the Atlanta startup culture. He blamed Harrison Sterling and the impossible expectations of Silicon Valley venture capitalists. He claimed the pressure to secure funding had warped his sense of reality and made him desperate to project an image of flawless generational wealth. And then, predictably, he blamed his mother. It was Vivian, Jamal pleaded, using his mother's first name as if distancing himself from her would somehow cleanse his own hands of the betrayal. She was in my ear every single day about the aesthetics, about our social standing, about making sure the wealthy corporate guests felt accommodated. She made me feel like if I did not project this flawless elite image, I would be a total failure. She pushed your parents to the back table, Kiara. I swear to you it was her idea. I should have stopped her. I know I should have stopped her, but I was so terrified of losing the funding. I was terrified of being exposed as a fraud. I lost sight of what actually mattered. I lost sight of you. I sat across from him entirely unbothered. I did not feel a single flicker of sympathy. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee and let the dark, bitter liquid coat my tongue. I watched him cry. I watched the tears spill over his eyelashes and track down his exhausted, unwashed face. A year ago, seeing him in this kind of pain would have absolutely broken my heart. I would have reached across the table, grabbed his hands, and promised to fix whatever was hurting him. I would have opened my checkbook and drained my own accounts to shield him from the consequences of his actions. Now I was just observing a stranger face the natural repercussions of his own cowardice. I will change, Jamal begged, misinterpreting my calm silence as hesitation. I am already looking into therapy. I cut off Malik and Lauren completely. I am not speaking to my mother. I blocked her number. I will move away from Atlanta, away from all the toxic high society garbage that ruined us. We can start over. We can build a real life together, just the two of us. Just give me one more chance to prove I can be the man you deserve. Please, Kiara, I have absolutely nothing left without you. I placed my coffee cup down on the saucer with a soft, final clink. I looked directly into his red, pleading eyes. The desperation radiating from him was palpable, thick enough to choke on, but it could not penetrate the absolute fortress I had built around my peace. He was not apologizing for breaking my heart. He was apologizing because his survival strategy had failed. He was begging for a second chance because the real world had rejected him, and I was the only life raft he had ever known. You are right about one thing, Jamal, I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of emotion. You have absolutely nothing left. But you are entirely wrong about why we are sitting here today. You think this is about you losing your tech company or letting the pressure of Atlanta's elite get to your head. You think this is just a business misstep, a temporary lapse in judgment that you can apologize your way out of. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the edge of the table, forcing him to hold my gaze. You didn't just disrespect me, Jamal. You disrespected the people who skipped meals so I could eat. You let a woman who produces nothing belittle the man who built my foundation. There is no coming back from that. Jamal opened his mouth to argue, to offer another pathetic excuse about his mother's influence, but I held up a single finger, silencing him instantly. The commanding gesture shut his mouth faster than any shout ever could. My father worked 30 years in the freezing rain and the boiling summer heat so I could sit in corporate boardrooms and build an empire. I continued, my voice slicing through his fragile defenses. My mother worked double shifts on her feet, wiping down hospital beds and charting vitals, so I could afford to become the woman sitting across from you right now. They sacrificed their bodies, their youth, and their pride to give me a chance at a life they were never allowed to have. Their rented suits hold more integrity and more financial value than every tailored tuxedo you ever bought with my stolen money. Jamal flinched, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks, but I offered him no reprieve. You watched your mother, a woman who has not worked an honest day in her entire life, treat my parents like embarrassing trash. And you chose her. You chose the illusion. You allowed a woman who produces absolutely nothing of value to look down on the very people who built the foundation of your survival. You did not just fail me as a partner, Jamal. You failed as a man of character. You traded basic human decency for a seat at a table you could not even afford. He hung his head, his shoulders shaking with silent, agonizing sobs. He had no counter-argument. There was no defense against the absolute truth. I watched him cry, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over my spirit. The charming, brilliant tech founder I thought I loved had never actually existed. The man sitting in front of me, weeping into his hands over the ruins of his own manufactured kingdom, was a total stranger. I felt no anger toward him anymore. The rage had burned away, leaving behind nothing but the clean, sharp reality of my own freedom. He was no longer my burden to carry. I reached into the structured leather tote bag resting at my feet and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I placed it squarely in the center of the small wooden table, right between his trembling hands and my half-empty coffee cup. The dull slap of the envelope hitting the wood made him jump slightly. He stared at it as if it were a bomb waiting to detonate. In many ways it was. Inside that envelope are 2 sets of legal documents. I said, my voice entirely devoid of malice or pity. I kept my tone as clinical as a bank teller finalizing a routine transaction. The first set is the formal corporate dissolution paperwork. It legally finalizes the total severance of my holding company from your defunct startup. It includes the asset forfeiture agreements outlining exactly how my legal team will be liquidating your remaining office hardware to recoup a fraction of the embezzled funds your brother took. Jamal stared at the envelope, his breath hitching in his chest. The second set, I continued tapping the thick paper with my index finger, is the annulment. My lawyers bypassed a standard divorce proceeding entirely. Because you actively engaged in financial fraud and willfully concealed the massive siphoning of marital assets prior to the ceremony, we filed for an absolute annulment based on fraudulent inducement. Legally speaking, our marriage will be erased as if it never existed. You will have absolutely no claim to spousal support, no claim to my corporate assets, and no legal standing to ever contact me again. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a heavy silver fountain pen. I slid it across the table until it touched his knuckles. Sign them, Jamal. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and swimming with a devastating mixture of grief and total defeat. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer one last pathetic plea for mercy, or perhaps a final apology, but the absolute stone-cold finality in my posture silenced him. He looked down at the silver pen. His hands shook violently as he picked it up. He fumbled with the clasp, pulling the documents out of the envelope and laying them flat on the table. I watched in absolute silence as the man who had tried to hide my parents by a bathroom hallway signed away his entire future. The scratch of the pen against the thick legal paper was the only sound between us. He did not read the clauses. He did not try to negotiate the terms. He was completely broken, stripped of his arrogance, his pride, and his illusions of grandeur. He signed his name on the designated lines, his signature sloppy and jagged, completely unlike the confident sweeping script he used to use on his fake investor contracts. When he finished the last page, he dropped the pen onto the table. It rolled and hit my coffee saucer with a sharp clank. He pushed the stack of papers back across the table toward me. He kept his head bowed, refusing to look me in the eye. I gathered the documents, making sure every signature was in place. I slid them neatly back into the manila envelope and tucked it securely into my tote bag. I did not say thank you. I did not wish him well. I did not offer a single word of comfort or closure. I simply stood up from my chair, smoothed the front of my trench coat, and turned my back on him forever. I walked toward the front entrance of the coffee shop, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not look back over my shoulder. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out onto the busy Atlanta sidewalk. The bright morning sun hit my face, instantly warming my skin. The thick, suffocating humidity of a Georgia summer had not yet settled in, leaving the air crisp and full of absolute promise. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp air of my newly reclaimed freedom. I felt lighter than I had in years. The massive, heavy boulder I had been dragging up a hill for 2 entire years, the burden of funding Jamal's ego, navigating Vivian's toxic classism, and pretending to be someone I was not, had been completely removed from my shoulders. I was untethered. I was untouchable. I walked to my car, a sleek, understated sedan that I owned outright, and slid into the driver's seat. I placed the manila envelope on the passenger seat, a tangible physical manifestation of my victory. I started the engine, pulled out into the bustling city traffic, and drove. I did not drive back to my corporate office, and I did not drive back to the Oakwood Manor estate. I drove away from the polished high society neighborhoods of Buckhead and Midtown. I drove toward a part of the city that rarely saw venture capitalists or flashy tech founders. I drove toward the working class heart of Atlanta, the kind of neighborhood where people woke up before dawn, took the early bus, and broke their backs to put food on the table. The kind of neighborhood that built people like my parents. I pulled into the massive gravel parking lot of a sprawling commercial property I had officially closed on just 3 days ago. The site was dominated by a huge, beautifully weathered brick warehouse that had sat abandoned for nearly a decade. It was surrounded by overgrown weeds and chain-link fencing, but the bones of the structure were magnificent. It was strong, resilient, and built to last. I parked my car, stepped out onto the gravel, and walked to the hood of my sedan. I unrolled a large set of architectural blueprints I had brought with me, pressing them flat against the warm metal of the car. I stood there under the bright, expansive sky, looking down at the future. This was not going to be another luxury event space for the elite. It was not going to be a boutique hotel or a pretentious country club. This 50,000 square foot warehouse was being completely gutted and transformed into a state-of-the-art community center. I traced my fingers over the detailed schematics. The left wing of the building was designated for a massive high-tech computer lab and coding academy designed specifically to teach underprivileged teenagers the exact skills they needed to build real sustainable careers in technology. They would not be learning how to fake financial reports or hustle venture capitalists. They would be learning how to write code, build infrastructure, and own their intellectual property. The right wing was mapped out as a comprehensive financial literacy and small business incubator for working-class adults. It would offer free legal clinics, accounting workshops, and grant writing assistance for people who had the drive and the talent, but lacked the capital and the connections. It was a space designed to build people up instead of shutting them out. I looked at the top of the blueprint where the official rendering of the building's future facade was printed. Above the main glass entryway, cast in bold, clean lettering, was the name of the new facility: the Joseph and Beatrice Center for Innovation and Excellence. I smiled, feeling a profound, overwhelming surge of pride swell in my chest. Vivian had looked at my parents and seen people who ruined her aesthetic. Jamal had looked at them and seen an embarrassment to be hidden away. But I looked at my parents and saw the absolute blueprint for true success. I saw integrity, resilience, and the kind of quiet, powerful dignity that no amount of money could ever buy. I was going to carve their names into brick and steel. I was going to ensure that their legacies stood tall in the middle of this city, empowering generations of people who looked just like them. I folded the blueprints back into a neat, tight roll. I looked up at the massive brick building standing strong and silent in the morning sun. I thought about the vows I was supposed to take standing on the stage at Oakwood Manor. I was supposed to promise to honor and cherish a man who viewed my family as disposable garbage. I was supposed to legally bind my hard-earned empire to a family of parasites who would have drained me dry while smiling in my face. Walking away from that altar, abandoning that fabricated high society illusion, was the most profitable, empowering, and deeply spiritual vow I had ever made to myself. I did not just save my financial empire, I saved my soul. I chose my blood over a fraudulent aesthetic. I chose my peace over a toxic charade. I got back into my car feeling an absolute, unshakable sense of purpose. The wedding was canceled, the fake tech CEO was bankrupt, and the arrogant mother-in-law was a social pariah. But my real work, the work that actually mattered, was just beginning. I put the car in drive, listening to the crunch of the gravel beneath my tires, and I pulled out onto the open road, ready to build an empire that would actually stand the test of time.